Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 783. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about wine and cliffs, hikes and trains, beaches, and rail bikes as we go to the Mendocino coast of California.
Should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Mendocino. I'd like to welcome to the show Brooke Herron, who is a digital marketing strategist in the wine industry, and she blogs at localfoodanddrinkmarketing.com, and she's come to talk to us about Mendocino. Brooke, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to add a note that local food and drink marketing is my business, like my day job. And then I also have a travel blog at adifferentkindoftravel.com.
Excellent.
Which is sort of like my side passion hobby, which is why I'm here.
And we talk about Mendocino. I don't think everyone who isn't my age has heard about, for instance, we used to talk about the wine area in California as Napa, Sonoma, and Mendocino. I feel like Mendocino has kind of slipped off that list a bit. We don't talk about it necessarily as much, but we are talking about Northern California to put it on the map. But what's your connection with Mendocino?
Okay, so a couple things. One, you are correct. People don't really talk about Mendocino wine or wine country, mostly because they've done a very good job of branding and educating the public on the Anderson Valley, which is a specific region within Mendocino. So people are more likely to say the Anderson Valley than to say Mendocino County wine, for instance. So that's one thing. Two, you are right. Maybe the reason that I'm traveling to Mendocino isn't only wine. And for me, it never started out that way. Like when I was a little kid and I first ended up in Mendocino with my family at like 7 or 8 years old, it's always been all about the ocean and the coast and the cliffs and this sort of mystic little coastal town kind of feel. That's how we started, why we started going to Mendocino. And it's a big part of why I continue going now.
Excellent. And Why? I think maybe we just answered this question. Why should somebody go to Mendocino?
Yeah, well, okay. So somebody that's a stranger, right? So
Hmm.
maybe you're not a Californian. Maybe you're not even a Northern Californian. Maybe you're from Southern California. Why would you come here, no matter where you're from? One, it is unbelievably gorgeous. Ragged cliffs, crashing waves, misty little coastal towns with historic churches. It's as if development stopped 40 or 50 years ago. And that is a feeling that is very, very hard to get in California, a very crowded and very popular state. On top of that, it's only a few hours from the Bay Area. So if you are coming into California as a tourist that wants to visit San Francisco, maybe you want to jet up to wine country, Sonoma and Napa counties, this is something that you can feasibly add on to that trip with a few days of extra time. And I think it's infinitely worth it just to have that feeling of being in some of the most stunning coastline in California, but without the massive crowds and sort of polished shininess and gentrification of maybe a lot of the rest of California.
Excellent. Well, what kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
Okay, there's so many different ways you could go, but
Hmm.
I think we should start with saying I don't know how everyone travels, but my top three things when I travel are these. One, I want it to be beautiful from a natural and outdoors perspective, right? I want to see beautiful places, nature, trees, ocean. That includes hiking. I love hiking. Second, I want there to be good food and or wine. So it's an added bonus if they've got a great wine region. And third, yes, the ocean. The ocean is for me just my happy place. So if I can get all those three things in one, I am a happy camper. So my 5-day itinerary recommendation for someone who might be similar to me in their tastes is to spend a couple of days and one night in the Anderson Valley, which is the wine region in southern Mendocino County,
Hmm.
inland. So if you're coming up from, let's say, Sonoma and Napa County, you would drive on the Highway 128 and you would end up in Boonville, which is in southern Mendocino County. It's inland, so this is not a coastal region yet. You've got redwoods and red dirt and soil. And what you're going to find in Anderson Valley is a wealth of amazing wineries. You've also got a really great cidery there. You've got a cool brewery. You can do both wine tastings and cider tastings. There's a state park. You can take a hike. And there's some great places to eat if you spend the night there, as well as to lay your head. So, first 2 days, Anderson Valley,
Okay.
wine, beer, cider, awesome. Now you're going to head out to the coast from the Anderson Valley. And this is where most people go when they do go to Mendocino County. They just go straight to the coast. You've got everything out in Mendocino. So first, for where to base yourself, you have two choices. You can choose Mendocino, the actual town of Mendocino,
Hmm.
which is very quaint, very small. It looks like it hasn't evolved since 1948, which is really cool. You don't see that often, but it's also been very well maintained, right? So it's not grubby or trashy. It's little cute little white painted churches and little roads you can walk around to every business. The crashing waves are all around you at any moment. So that's one choice where to base yourself. Or you can go 10 minutes up the road to Fort Bragg, which is another place you can base yourself and also a great option. Not as charming of a town to walk around, but really well situated to
Hmm.
visit ocean and scenic spots and hiking. So those are your two choices for where to base yourself. Now you've got 3 days in which to enjoy this whole coastal region. A few of the things you can do are visit beaches such as Glass Beach in Fort Bragg, which is famous, and the Noyo Headlands, which is a historic coastal monument, which is amazing. Wildlife everywhere, miles stretching along the coast. You can jaunt around the headlands in the town of Mendocino, which is basically, if you're in the town of Mendocino, you can literally just walk a few blocks out to the tufts along the cliffs. And you've got a few miles of trails that you can wind around as you enjoy beach views, ocean views. There's rock arches and formations, lots of wildlife.
And Brooke, I'm going to pause you here a bit. If we're going to start to go into more detail, then let's back up and do it from the beginning. So
Okay.
you started us in the Anderson Valley, and you mentioned cideries, breweries, and wineries, and state parks, but you didn't get specific. So let's go to the
Yeah.
specifics. There's more wineries than we can visit.
Yeah.
So what are your favorites?
I like a lot of them. I'm just going to mention a few of my top favorites. So, Drew Wines, which is owned by a wonderful couple, Molly
Hmm.
and Jason. That's my favorite place for Pinot Noirs in Anderson Valley. So, they've got a tasting room in Philo, which is a little town in Anderson Valley. Toulouse Vineyards, which has great white
Love
wines and
Toulouse.
rosé.
Hmm.
Roederer for sparkling wine, top level California sparkling wine.
And Toulouse also has a tasting room that is out on their patio deck with
Yes.
views of the whole area. So,
Yes.
it's not just that the wine is good, but it's a nice experience.
One of the best patios for sure. Then, of course, Navarro. No one can forget Navarro. I've been going to Navarro since 2001
Hmm.
when I was 21, my first year in the wine industry, and they have always just been consistently amazing. The wines, the hospitality, they've got a beautiful setting. So, Navarro is known for their white wines, really beautiful, floral, aromatic, dry white wines. They've also got some lovely Pinot, again, views, nice people. Then you've also got Penny Royal Farm and Winery, which is a new addition to the Anderson Valley in the
Hmm.
last couple of years. And they've got both farmstead cheeses and a farm, as well as amazing wines.
And you mentioned the Pinot Noirs, and for those people who are into their wines, they already know that that implies that this region is cooler than the
Hmm.
Napa and Sonoma region. We're heading towards the coast, and we're starting to get into those more coastal wines.
Yeah. So, as a wine industry person who's worked in the wine industry for 20 years, but also as a European wine drinker, I've
Hmm.
lived in Europe, I've worked with import companies. I tend to drink more French and Italian wine than anything. But when it comes to California wine regions, the Anderson Valley is one of my absolute favorites, and that is especially for Pinot Noirs and white wines.
Hmm.
People don't think of Anderson Valley typically about white wines. They think Pinot Noir, right? Because Pinot Noir is very trendy and very popular, and it's also more expensive. So it makes people more money to sell. But
Sure,
Anderson
it's a business.
Valley, how that valley started was due to Gewürztraminer and Riesling and
Oh,
aromatic
interesting.
whites. People moved there and they planted Gewürztraminer. They planted Riesling. They planted Pinot Blanc. It was all about the Alsace white varietals.
Hmm.
And Ted, the founder of Navarro, can tell you this. This was what they saw as the potential of this region. It was only later that everybody planted Pinot Noir because they saw the potential for that. It was very popular, very profitable. But Navarro is one of those few wineries that still exist that almost exclusively focuses on white wines because it's an absolutely gorgeous area for white wines. Very, very unique.
Interesting. And then you mentioned cider and beer.
Yeah, so there's Anderson Valley Brewing Company there, which is a brewery. I'm not a big beer drinker, but I like to mention that in case you have a partner who's a beer drinker and you want to mix up the wine tasting with beer. And there's also a family owned apple orchard and cidery called Gowan's. And they were originally always apple farmers that just sold their apples until this last 10 years or so when the matriarch of the family decided to start a cider brand called Gowan's Heirloom Cider. And they make some stunning ciders. And just this last year during COVID in 2020, they finally launched their orchard cider tours and tastings. So now you can stop at their farm and have a cider tasting in their orchard underneath their apple trees, which previous to now you could not taste on site and you just had to buy a bottle from a store if you were there.
Interesting. Now, the one thing I found when I visited last year during COVID was that there weren't tasting rooms open necessarily all week long. They tended to be
Yeah.
open more on the weekends. Is that still the case?
It's still the case, especially with the smaller guys. Like, for
Okay.
instance, Drew Family Wines, they're just two people own that winery. They're typically Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But what you will see in Anderson Valley in general, even in non COVID years, is that in winter months, they really shorten their days and
Sure.
hours because
Those
there's
are
just not as
not our
much
tourist
traffic
season.
up
Yeah.
there.
Hmm.
And summer, they really extend it and they're open a lot more. So you really want to check their websites, both for restaurants as well as for wineries, because if you do go stay up there during winter, you might end up with nowhere to go out and eat. So you
Right.
just want to take a look at their websites. It's not Sonoma or Napa County. There are not 1 million people there every single day.
Well, I would also check to see whether different wineries in California require reservations, especially in 2021 and 2022. So just double
Yeah,
check before you go.
absolutely. Check to be sure, although I have seen in Anderson Valley, people have started being much more open again as
Hmm.
far as stop in tastings. But again, things change month by month right now, as you know.
Right.
So,
And also don't expect that you'll get cell phone coverage while you're
yes,
driving through the Anderson Valley. So check before you go.
you may or may not.
Excellent. And then you mentioned a state park and a hike.
Yeah, so there's Hendy Woods, which is a state park in
Hmm.
Mendocino. So, if you're camping in Mendocino, you can camp there, or you're staying at a local B&B or accommodation, which they've got a really cool like shepherd's huts on an apple farm that I stay in when I go there,
Hmm.
or I stay at the Boonville Hotel. I like to start my morning with a hike so that I can get some exercise and burn some calories before I start gnawing down on some cheese and sipping lots of wine all day.
Well, and when we were there, we did the Upper Loop Trail in Hendy Woods State Park, and I just remember the light sifting in through these redwood trees and the shafts of light, and it was just a beautiful, easy hike, easy family hike sort of thing. I'm sure
Yeah.
that there are more difficult hikes there, but we did not do them.
I haven't found super difficult hikes there, and I'm an avid hiker.
Okay.
Every weekend, I'm doing 10 to 14-mile hikes every Saturday, usually pretty difficult ones. I would say it's not a super challenging hike area unless you're a local that maybe knows a secret that I don't. I tend to wait and do my serious hikes in Mendocino because they have so many parks up there.
Okay.
Hendy is more like you said, it's a pretty easy morning jaunt, but it's great to get out and just sniff the redwoods and get that feeling of where you are, which is very foresty, right? You're not
Hmm.
at the coast yet, but you feel the coast creeping in. You see the redwoods, you can kind of feel the mist and the moisture in the air, but the ocean isn't there yet. So it's a really wonderful place to stop and just kind of get a sense of what you're entering into before you get out to that open kind of coastal area.
Okay. Excellent. Anything else in the valley before we head up into Mendocino?
There's so much more, but I think we should probably get on to the coast.
Excellent. Anything else in Boonville, for instance?
One thing I would say is if you have been to Mendocino recently and you're
Hmm.
going back, do not miss Pennyroyal Farm.
Okay.
Just for every reason, for the cute animals, for the farm to table stuff they pull out of the garden and serve for lunch, for the cheeses, and for the wine.
Excellent. And then we're heading up along into the coast. We get on to Highway 1. I think one of the prettiest parts of Highway 1 in California, and that's saying quite a lot.
There's so many beautiful places, but I like the one between Jenner in Sonoma County and
Okay.
Mendocino. It's a rough road, as you know.
It
Not many
is
people
not
take
for
that route.
making time.
Yeah, it's not for good time, but
Yeah.
if you have the time, of course, if you do the coastal route, you're not going to get Anderson Valley, right?
Right.
So what I typically do is I go up through the Anderson Valley and then I come back along the coast, the slow route.
Okay.
But either way, yes, it's all scenic. As you're coming up into Mendocino County, you're seeing the ocean off to your left, crashing waves, brilliant turquoise water. Things start to look different. You start seeing little old school cemeteries and kind of older school buildings. The crowds thin out. And then you get to the little town, the little village, I like to say, of Mendocino. And it sort of feels like when you get into Mendocino, you can just drop your car off and just start walking, right? Because
Oh,
you've
yeah.
got the entire Headlands Park there. You've got
Mhm.
miles of coastal trails. You got restaurants, you got supermarkets.
So you mentioned Headlands Park. So it's on a peninsula
Hmm.
and surrounded by park.
Yeah.
And if you walked all of Mendocino and every single street, it would take you 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's people can't, I don't think they can conceptualize how real, just cool this experience is. There's no other place I can think of in California where you've got this kind of setting that's so small and quaint, and yet at every single turn, no matter where you look, you've got the ocean. And you're just blocks away from it. You can literally hit the pub and be at the cliffs in 5 minutes from the pub. So I love it. That's one of my favorite places to hang out. There's just endless views along all these miles of coastline. There's beaches you can overlook,
Hmm.
blah, 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 right? But then I don't want to stop there because that's just one place you can go. There's also a lot of parks near the town of Mendocino,
Hmm.
both just before Mendocino and also after Mendocino, between Mendocino and Fort Bragg. So along this stretch, within just a 10-mile distance, you've got Van Dam State Park, which is before you get to the town of Mendocino, which has amazing hiking and trails. Absolutely love it. You've got Russian Gulch State Park, and you've got Jug Handle State Park. So you've got a lot of parks to choose from and a lot of trails and hikes that you can do. And you've also got a lighthouse you can hike out to and sort of walk around the cliffs with the view of the lighthouse. You've got beaches.
Okay. You just reminded me of something, actually, when you said Russian Gulch State Park. If you do the route into Mendocino that Brooke was talking about, where you do go up the coast, and you got to have time to do it because it's a slow drive, as we said, spectacular but slow. One of the things that you'll get as you leave Jenner, which he mentioned, which is directly across from Santa Rosa, which is one of the bigger cities in the area, directly west of there. But just as you get north of Jenner, about 12 miles, you're still south of Mendocino County at this point, you get to the Russian presence in California. You get to Fort Ross, and Fort Ross is where the Russians had an outpost to provide supplies for their colonies up in Alaska before they sold Alaska to the U.S. They moved out in, I think it was 1849 or right around, no, it was before the gold rush. So they moved out in the early 1800s, 30s or 40s. I can't do it off the top of my head. And definitely worth a stop if you like history, if you're doing that slow winding drive on the way up.
One interesting note about Fort Ross and the Russian settlers is that some of the first apples ever planted in California, actually the earliest known orchards planted, were in that area for the Russian settlers. They were actually, though, to be sent to Alaska from there. To Russian settlers in Alaska. So,
well, here's another historic little thing of small world thing. Fort Ross was bought by the Russians and was owned for a time by Sutter, John Sutter. And if the name is familiar to you, it's because one of Sutter's employees is the one who discovered gold in the gold rush. And this is before then.
That makes sense.
So,
wow. Learn something every day.
Excellent.
Ah, bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore, and this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, call is semi-heure. Parfait. Semi-o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
Llévate más de lo que esperas todos los días con el nuevo McValue en McDonald's. Ahora puedes comprar uno y sumarle otro por $1. Así que cuando tu equipo favorito enfrente a sus rivales, enfrenta tus antojos con $5 Meal Deals. Y si estás corriendo para alcanzar el desayuno, corre al app para llevarte ofertas antes del cutoff. Tú decides, y con McValue, tu decisión siempre rinde más. Precios y participación pueden variar. BOGO $1 válido para un producto de igual o menor valor. Debe estar registrado en Rewards para ofertas en el app.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Yes.
And you mentioned any particular hikes that you wanted to recommend in those 3 state parks that you had mentioned?
Yeah. So at Van Dam, there's a great hike. I don't know the name of the trail because I've done it so many times and for so many years, but you end up in what's called the Pixie Forest, and it's just a really cool hike. It can be anywhere from 4 or 5 miles to 10 to 12 miles. I'm typically doing the 9 to 10 mile hike when I'm there, but you don't have to hike that far to get some of these views. It's also across the street from a beach. So it's a great place to stop once you've been driving for a lot of hours, park at the beach, walk into the park, or park at the park and take a hike before you get into Mendocino.
Okay.
Next is Russian Gulch and Jug Handle. There's good hikes in both of these state parks. I have to say Russian Gulch has perhaps my favorite hike, and it's mostly because the entire main hiking trail there is all in a sort of soft padded forest trail along trails that are surrounded and framed by redwoods. And so you're in shade and you're surrounded by redwoods and your feet are padding along this very soft little red trail covered in pine needles, and it's awesome. It feels like when you're hiking there, the entire world has faded away. You can't hear traffic. You can't even hear people that are on other trails, even if it's crowded. It's just this wonderful, quiet, green forest. So Russian Gulch is maybe my top pick for a hike, but it's also a great park to camp in. So if you're
Okay.
camping because you're going the budget route, right,
Hmm.
which I do often, Russian Gulch is a wonderful place to camp at because you can just get up in the morning and head out to some of the most spectacular views of the coast right there in the park, and then you can go on a hike. And you don't have to leave or get in your car.
Excellent. If you're not camping and you're not on a budget,
Yes.
Little River Inn, just south of Mendocino, is
Well,
a
that's beautiful.
historic, beautiful place right on the bluffs overlooking the ocean. I should say that they sponsored me to stay there, so a little disclosure there, but I loved it. It was quite modern and yet quite historic at the same time.
Yeah, and Little River is great if you want to be a bit more removed, right? Like you don't mind that you're not going to be walking distance to
No,
things.
right. You have to drive to get to Mendocino from there. Exactly. Hmm.
If you want luxury and to be able to walk to downtown Mendocino, I like the Mendocino Seaside Cottages.
Okay.
We're talking a place that has every single amenity you could imagine: steam bathtub, steam room, views of the ocean, and you're also minutes away from downtown Mendocino. So
Got it.
it's very small, but you've got all the luxuries you need: great linens, fireplaces, you got a little mini fridge, little stove. And then when you pop out of your front door, you basically walk along the ocean front in the Mendocino headlands
Hmm.
about 5 minutes, and then you're right in the little center of the town.
Okay.
So that's another luxury option if you want to walk to places.
Excellent. Where to next? Anything else we want to do in Mendocino? Sites or restaurants or shops?
Yeah, so Mendocino itself is just so charming. Just walk everywhere. Just look at everything. You're going to see it. I don't need, if I tell you there's a church, it's not going to help you. You're going to see the church when you get there. I mean, this is a very small town, but it is beautiful. So just take your time and just enjoy the fact that it's one of the few places in the United States and in California where you can walk and do anything you need to do. One of my absolute favorite places to stop in the morning when I'm walking around Mendocino is the Good Life Bakery. I get my gluten-free baked goods. I get my cappuccino. I walk out to the headlands. One of my favorite places to stop to eat is Patterson's Pub. It's not the nicest restaurant there, and I am a foodie. I love fine dining. But when I go to the coast, I don't need fancy. I just want casual and comfortable. And the pub there, it just has that feeling where it's the only place you're going to go where there's equally locals and tourists.
Okay.
And there's almost always a guy playing the guitar, no matter what time of year you're there. So you can go grab your burger and fries or your crab cakes or your crab louie, and you can listen to some guy on the fiddle at Patterson's Pub, and then you can go watch the sunset on the cliffs at the headlands. Those are probably some of my favorite things to do. And then before you leave Mendocino, and we haven't even gotten to Fort Bragg yet,
Yep.
you do want to see the Point Cabrillo Lighthouse.
Oh, okay.
So wonderful. A lot of times I go to Mendocino when I don't have time to do all this. I really like to relax and I just like to hang out in Mendocino. But the Point Cabrillo Lighthouse is really cool. You can park basically about a mile from the lighthouse at the visitor center, and then you walk about a mile out to the coast and to the lighthouse. And then there's some trails there along the cliffs. And you can also, if it's during visiting hours, you can go inside the lighthouse and to the gift shop. What's really cool about this is first of all, you're seeing some history. And second, when you're walking to or from the lighthouse, you can kind of see these old cute little cottages that the lighthouse keepers used to live in.
Hmm.
And they were obviously built in like the 1930s or 40s. It's really, really quaint. It's something a lot of people forget to do when they go to Mendocino.
Excellent. Shall we head up to Fort Bragg, or is there something else we're going to stop at on the way?
Okay, let's say we're leaving Mendocino right now
Mhm.
and we're on our way to Fort Bragg. What we have between Mendocino and Fort Bragg are Russian Gulch Park and Jug Handle Park.
Mhm.
We already discussed that they both have great hiking trails. Russian Gulch has a campground that's really a wonderful place to stay. Jug Handle State Park and Beach also has a gorgeous white sand beach that you can stop at and picnic at or just kind of hang out and take a nap on. So those are two places that you don't want to miss between Mendocino and Fort Bragg.
Now, the only thing I think we need to say, because not everybody is from Northern California, and so when we say California Beach, you may not have the correct mental image. So what am I wearing at the beach?
Usually a hoodie and socks and shoes. But I will say with global warming, my friend, last time I was at Jug Handle, I was pretty darn hot.
Okay.
I was wearing a tank top, I had shorts on, and I was roasting. But it's the coast, and it's the Northern California coast, which
Right.
means at any moment the mist could descend upon you, and you could really wish that you had multiple layers.
Right.
So never go to the beach in Northern California expecting to tan or just like lay out and bake yourself.
Well, and that's when you say Northern California, that's really Central and Northern California. That's the whole 2/3 of the north of the
Yeah.
state. You always bring a sweatshirt.
Yeah.
It just
It isn't Malibu.
No, it isn't Malibu. The fog will roll in at 3 o'clock on most days, and will stay in the mornings till 10 o'clock. And some days it doesn't burn off at all. Yeah. And
Yes.
if you don't like that, this is not your destination.
That's what I love about our beaches because
Yeah.
I mean, I've never understood the concept of just laying around on a beach sweating with tanning oil. I want to play frisbee. I want to like have a picnic. I
Mhm.
want to write in my journal. So it's perfect for all of that. So if you're leaving Mendocino, you're now passing the two parks, you're entering Fort Bragg. Probably if you're coming to Fort Bragg, it's because you have quite a bit of time, right? Because we've already done a lot of stuff here. We visited wine country, we went to Mendocino, we've gone hiking. So if you're going to Fort Bragg, it's probably because you have a longer trip. If you don't have a long enough time, I would just stick with all the things we've already recommended. But if you do have more time, Fort Bragg is a great place to go. And primarily the main attraction in Fort Bragg for most people is Glass Beach, which is a beach that's known for having soft, worn away pieces of green glass on the beach.
Sea glass.
Yeah, but for me, I'm going to extend that because what I find is that actually Glass Beach can be a little bit underwhelming. Most people steal the glass and there's no glass left by the time you get there. What people forget to say when they talk about Glass Beach is that it's connected to the Noyo Headlands, which is this beautiful stretch of coastline that is part of a historic coastal monument in Northern California. It's the only landmass that is a historic coastal monument.
Hmm.
And along this whole stretch that stretches from Point Arena south of Mendocino to this place in Fort Bragg, it's a wildlife haven. So you've
Mhm.
got seals and sea lions and rare birds and tide pools and just beautiful views for miles along this coastline.
And don't forget otters.
Yes, see all everything.
Yep.
So I just like to walk up and down that beautiful path along the ocean
Mhm.
in the headlands and stop at benches, take in the view, and then you can end at Glass Beach and kind of hang out at that beach if you want.
Okay.
That's pretty much it for Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg isn't really like the place you go in Mendocino, but it is well situated to visit a lot of things.
Now you're skipping one thing that Fort Bragg is well known for, which you
Okay.
may be skipping on purpose, and that would be the skunk train.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not a super big fan of the skunk train, but that is a good point to make.
And so the skunk train used to be a train that went from Fort Bragg and it went all the way into the Highway 101, which goes up further inland the coast. It doesn't do that anymore because they've lost some trestles, but now it goes into the redwoods, and then there's an opportunity to hike there, and it tends to be a family-oriented sort of experience. I've done it with my young kids. But what they have now, which I really did enjoy, was they have rail bikes.
Oh, nice.
And so you can do
I
this.
have not done the rail bike.
I
I'm gonna have to
I
try
did the
that.
rail bikes. They sponsored me to do the rail bikes. Again, truth in advertising here. But I quite enjoyed it. So the rail bike is a 500-pound bike. You sit two people aside. You've got pedals in front of you, but you also have electronic assist to get you up the hills, and then the wheels fit onto the rails. And so
Oh my
they
gosh.
try and time this to not go when the train is going for obvious reasons, but you
Try?
they were pretty good. But you
Do they have
basically
you sign paperwork
bike
when you
your
get on these
way
bikes?
up out of town, through town, basically with the train crossings closing in front of you, even though you're on this contraption, and contraption is really the only way to say it. I've seen that other places have rail bikes now too, and it is a fun experience, and it's
I really
good
like
exercise.
that idea. First of all, it's exercise, but second of all, what a cool way. You know, the one thing about the skunk train I would like is if they just had some really good wine, but they don't.
They don't offer it that. No, they don't. So, but you go through then up into the redwoods and again to the same place where the train stops, and you get to hike around for a little bit there. But as you're going at the speed that you're pedaling plus whatever you've got on the assist from the electric motor. And so you're going at a slow enough speed that you can enjoy the scenery and get some exercise. It was a blast. It was fun.
I'm doing that next time I go back. I'll get your contact when we get off this call. I love that idea. I think I drink a lot of wine and I eat a lot of seafood when I go up there. So I would love to try the rail bikes.
And then we did also eat at the brewing there, North Coast Brewing Tap Room Restaurant and Bar that's in town there. And because my wife is the beer drinker. And so we did get that when we were in town.
There's also the Noyo Harbor Hotel, which is the best restaurant in Fort Bragg.
We stayed there. We ate there. Loved it for the stay. Loved it for the food. Yeah.
It's the only nice restaurant in Fort Bragg that I would recommend. I like the dining options in Mendocino better, but I also kind of love how just very casual Fort Bragg is. I mean, you do not feel that you're in a touristy place in Fort Bragg.
No, Fort Bragg is a real place where people live. Mendocino doesn't feel that way.
It's millionaires with nice houses that have,
Well, and hippies.
Hippies that have turned into millionaires because they own their houses for so long.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing we have missed though. So one thing I do love from Fort Bragg. So this is last time I went up to Mendocino County, I made the point to stay in Fort Bragg because I never stay in Fort Bragg. And I was so happy that I did because first of all, I did feel that weight off my shoulders of I don't have to contend with tourists, right? But second of all, I positioned myself so that I had time to do things I don't normally do, which is one of the best things I did was go just a bit north, about 12 minutes driving up the one from Fort Bragg to the Pacific Star Winery, which I'm not saying they have the best wines in the world, but this is the only situation I've ever had in my entire life in the United States where I was sitting on the edge of the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean at a winery. It was unbelievably stunning and gorgeous. And I brought cheese and crackers and I brought a friend I had been hiking with. And we just sat on these little wine barrel benches overlooking the Pacific Ocean with waves crashing on us while we drank whatever the bottle of wine is that we had to buy to be there. And we ate our picnic and it was fantastic. And on the way to that winery, we passed just beach after beach after beach. So if you give yourself that extra time to kind of go beyond Mendocino, the town of, what you do is you discover a lot of stuff that people don't generally go that far to find. And there's some really, really beautiful places up there.
Well, you say beach after beach, you pass 10 Mile Beach. So it's 10 miles of beach. Fairly self-explanatory from the name there.
I just wanted to stop. I just wanted to stop at every beach. Yeah. And, it's not crowded up when you go that far north.
Oh, good grief, no. No, there's a mile for everybody. So, definitely not very crowded for any of the beaches on the coast, north of Stinson Beach in just north of San Francisco. Once you head north of there, you won't find a lot of crowded beaches.
Yes, it's why I always go north of there.
Now, one thing I'm curious about, you are a hiker much more so than I am. North of Mendocino, you get the Lost Coast. Have you ever done the hike?
Oh my gosh, this is a great question because I just scheduled a camping trip for spring to do the southern portion of the Lost Coast Trail. We really tried to get a permit to do the north portion, but we couldn't. It was a very complicated system where you can only get one permit at a time. It's only good for 3 people. If you and your friend log on from different places, there's no way you're going to get them for the same date. So what is the Lost Coast that we're talking about here? That's Humboldt County, though. That's not really Mendocino County. But yes, I go to Humboldt County also very often for similar reasons to why I travel to Mendocino. But when I want to see even less people, that's when I go to Humboldt. And you know what? That's getting to be more often. So I go there primarily to just be surrounded by a very green forested area that's also very quiet. It feels kind of spiritual and calming, but you're also never far from the ocean. It's got everything you want. It's certainly not as developed, right? You're not going to find the same foodie scene in Humboldt County that you are in Mendocino. Definitely a little somewhat impoverished from an economic perspective, although it's getting better. But there's a lot of stuff I love about Humboldt County, and one of those is the hiking trails. And the Lost Coast is perhaps the most famous. So if anybody out there in the rest of our country knows about Humboldt County, it's for one of 2 reasons. It's one, because of pot, right? It's known for having a lot
Right.
of marijuana. And or two, it might be because of the Lost Coast Trail if they're really into long distance hiking. So the thing with the Lost Coast Trail is you have to apply for a permit now to be able to backpack along that trail,
Mhm.
and they're not easy to get, and there's strict limits on how many people and all this stuff. They open it up for a short window online, and if you don't get on that date, as soon as it opens up, you will not have a permit.
Hmm.
That's for the northern portion, which is more popular because it's in the most beautiful part of Humboldt County. Now there's a southern portion, which is closer to like your Shelter Cove and Ferndale part of Humboldt. And that is what I'm going to be doing in spring next year.
Well, and we should say, so in California, most of the way along the coast of California, which is quite long, Highway 1 runs along the coast. And people have heard of Highway 1, the Pacific Coast Highway, as they call it in Southern California. But up here, we just tend to call it Highway 1. But this one particular place, the Lost Trail place, the Lost Coast place of California, there is no highway. The only way to go along the coast is to hike.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, you can drive on parts of it, but let me tell you, they are not good roads.
Yeah.
So it's why it's called the Lost Coast, because if you go down those roads, you may be lost forever. So
Excellent. Anything else we need to talk about up in going back down to the Mendocino area?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, there's so much more I could say, but I don't want to bore your audience. So fun facts, it depends on how old you are, but if you've ever watched a James Dean film, right, or you know about the James Dean buzz, the film East of Eden, which starred James Dean, was filmed in Mendocino. So that's kind of a cool film to go watch if you kind of want to get a little old school sense of Mendocino. Another cool thing, which I find fascinating as a Northern California native, is that like many other towns on the Northern California coast, Mendocino was founded originally as a logging community. So it was basically founded by a logging company and turned into a logging town where everybody that lived there was either working for the logging company or married to someone from the logging company, right? Or running a business to serve those that worked at that logging company. And that's something really interesting because if you're driving around Northern California, out in these remote coastal towns, if you keep that in mind that this used to be a really big logging area, it's going to start to make sense to you, some of the stuff you see. There are some towns that now don't even exist that used to be logging towns, right? You just find like ghost hotels and buildings, and it's really cool. I like that because as Americans, sometimes we feel like we don't have any history. That's just not true. There's always history. It just may be only 150 years, right? Instead of 1,000 years.
Right.
And Mendocino was actually founded in 1852, I believe. So
something like that. I don't have it off the top of my head, but
150 years. 100, wait, more than that. 150, 70 years. So old by United States standards and old by California standards, especially. So I love to think about that while I'm walking around these towns, looking at the buildings and the trees and kind of just thinking about the first people that arrived to that area and turned it into what it is.
Excellent. You were standing at the prettiest spot in the Mendocino area. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Oh, this is really tricky because I think it's a secret spot and I can't tell you the directions. I could tell you the directions
but
after
you'd have
this
to kill
podcast. Me? So there's a secret spot, and I'm actually happy to share it with you after this. I just have to go look up my directions between Mendocino and Fort Bragg, where there's a street that you pass, and if you know that it's there, you take a turn off the highway, and you go down a road, and you park, and there's a little trailhead that only locals know about, and you walk through this little part of wooded area for about a quarter of a mile, and then you end up out on the coast, on the cliffs, just over crashing waves. And there's a private beach that no one knows about. And you can just hang out there for hours, either on the beach, on the cliffs. It's probably equally pretty as the Mendocino headlands, right? So there's nothing you're missing if you're on the Mendocino headlands, but it's kind of cool that nobody really knows about it except locals.
Excellent. And I assume that people can contact you and you'll try and give them directions.
You can. I can find the text that I send to my friends when I tell them where it is.
And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in Mendocino.
I actually included this in an article I wrote recently for Edible Marin and Wine Country. And one of the things I mentioned was, oh, it's so Mendocino, right? It's so Anderson Valley. I was hanging out at this apple farm, which has some B&B kind of cottages, and
Hmm.
talking to the owner. And the owner had just this attitude, right? Of like, no big deal. Don't care what you do. Don't care what you don't do. Just relax and hang out. I asked him like for some suggestions. I'm like, what to do? And he's like, you're here. Isn't that enough? And I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. You are so correct, but I'm a journalist, so I'm going to have to ask again. But I actually ended up putting that in my article because that kind of defines why I go to Mendocino, and what I love about the feel there is that people just don't give a bleep, right? Like they're not there to try to create like a Healdsburg downtown or a Napa downtown where you're Instagramming every plate of food and people are coming out of limos. That is not what they're there for. They moved up there, most of them in the 70s and 80s, because it was a beautiful, beautiful area of the coast that hadn't been developed yet. And they
Hmm.
don't want to be in that shiny, gentrified, crowded Instagram world. And I love that about them. They're more likely to tell you, just sit down, hang out, than they are to try to pack your mind with a bunch of itinerary suggestions.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize the Mendocino area in just 3 words, what 3 words are you going to use?
Calming,
Okay.
mystical,
Okay.
scenic.
Excellent. Well, and Brooke Herron has been our guest, and this time let's mention the travel blog from
Yeah.
a different kind of travel.com. And Brooke, if we want to send people to your best post on Mendocino, where are we going to send them?
Mendocino Hiking and Views is one that I have on my
Okay.
blog. I also have a couple of posts about the Anderson Valley wineries. So just type that search into my blog and you should be able to find a few posts.
Excellent, excellent. Well, and I will also put a link to my recent experience, including a video of what it's
Yes.
like to ride a rail bike up there in Fort Bragg.
I'm going to watch that because I really want to do that now.
And Brooke, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for the Mendocino area.
Thank you for having me.
This episode is brought to you by FedEx. FedEx knows running a small business is hard enough without the hassle of shipping. That's why there's FedEx One Rate. With FedEx One Rate, you can ship your holiday packages cheaper than the post office for as low as $14.50 for small boxes. Visit FedEx.com/OneRate for details. Exclusions apply. Valid through January 19, 2025. FedEx One Rate. 2-day retail shipping, one flat rate.
The wrongs we must right. The fights we must win. The future we must secure together for our nation. This is what's in front of us. This determines what's next for all of us. We are Marines. We were made for this.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Thanks go out to the patrons of Amateur Traveler who help support the show financially. If you are interested in supporting the show and want to find out what you'll get, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. I have to mention that since this show, we talked a lot about wine, and I have been accused of being a California wine snob, only because I am, that I'm just back from a trip to Virginia and Maryland. And while I was in Virginia, I tried some wines at a local winery, and they were quite credible. They were good wines. We enjoyed it. We enjoyed the experience sitting out in the winter cold in Virginia by a fireplace and drinking some wine. And I hope your holiday travels were enjoyable and that you didn't get COVID. And speaking of travel, assuming things are going to get better on the COVID front, we are actually planning to do an amateur traveler trip in September of 2022. And the vote is in. We're going to try again, third time's the charm, for the trip that we tried to schedule for 2020 to Turkey. And you can find out more information about that by going to amateurtraveler.com/trips. John asked a question that I can't answer, and maybe one of you can. Chris, I enjoy your podcast and have been listening for several years. I seem to recall that one of your guests mentioned an online private French tutor who lived in France. Do you recall that episode? If not, can you recommend someone? We are planning a trip to France in May. Thanks. And I don't have someone in mind, and I don't recall that episode. I'm wondering if someone does. Just contact me at host@amateurtraveler.com, and I can pass that on to John. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Well, I got a cotton candy canned wine email, my friend, and I'm like, but no. I will never be writing about your cotton candy wine ever.
Wine that tastes like cotton candy is what we're going for?
Oh, God, don't even make me relive the moment. The moment I found out there was cotton candy flavored wine, just make it stop.